Now, let's move into the blue hexagon. The system is also designed to create coherence across roles, events, routines, and tools. Again, we're going to do the high level, what's really key about this. There's more learning here for everybody. This is connected again to our trap of just put the magical thing in and everything will be better, okay? Now, here's what we did not do. Often, efforts have new roles, right? Like, let's create a math specialist role. That's a thing to do. Or let's plan a really great 3-hour PD. That's an event, right? Learning systems have roles and events. They often have routines. So an example might be we always do an exit ticket at the end of PD, right? That's a routine that we always do. Or we always look at classroom data. These are different routines that we do. And then learning systems always have tools. So it might be a curriculum, it might be a instructional vision, it might be a rubric, right? Often, these things are isolated in learning systems. That is what we did not do. We had roles and events and tools and routines. These are just some of them. But what's key is they were connected, okay? Now I'm gonna try I made this morning. I don't know if anyone's seen it yet. This is my attempt to show how they're connected. Let's see how I did. So here's what we did do. Rather than have them all be separate, we weren't really thinking of them in connection. So one of our events is the EMS monthly learning session, okay? That had some people in it. It had different roles. It had early math team, EMSs, some like researchers were part of designing those. And it had some of these tools. So here I just put 3, right? Maybe we learned about the trajectory. We really dug into it in relation to the instructional practices in the number corner. That event has those tools and those roles in it. And one of the beautiful things that happened in that EMS space is there was some really messy learning in Canva where you were synchronously putting all your ideas together on one piece of virtual paper, right? That's a routine that developed in that space to be able to learn about some of these ideas, okay? So there we have events, routines, tools, and roles in that one EMS monthly learning. Now here's what's important. Part of what also happened there was previewing of a local leader meeting agenda and a new tool of an adaptable agenda, keyword adaptable, to use with local leadership teams. So then we were able to move that, all of that learning connected into a different event, the local leader meeting, where we had other roles like the EMSs or local leaders or teachers were in those meetings engaging with the same tools, learning about the same ideas in their context. Now, that same learning would then also happen in the local leader network with some other people, but the same kinds of tools were coming up in these spaces. Similarly, the EMSs would have coffee hour and be able to talk about how some of these things were going in their context, okay? This is intentionally messy because it felt a little messy. That's kind of the point. But what I'm hoping you're seeing is then all of these were drawn upon to design the next EMS monthly learning. So what happened was we designed it all in connection to each other. That is what is different. If our story does not include the connectiveness of all of these things and how we intentionally worked on connecting things across the system, then we're not telling the story right. If we just say, oh yeah, we had some monthly meetings and coffee hours and the leaders met together sometimes, that does not capture what we did here and what was important about what we did here. What do you think, Rusty? Did I capture it? Okay. This is what supports people to move along the trajectory. Having rules, events, routines, and tools over time connected to each other in coherent ways, okay? And there you see the coherence. The coherence has to be across all of these things in terms of who is there. That's part of creating coherence. If leaders are in multiple spaces, that creates coherence. If the same tools are being used, that creates coherence. If we're all talking about learners on the trajectory, that creates coherence. If the second monthly meeting, monthly learning, is building off of what happened and what people said and thought about in the first one, then that creates coherence, okay? one point I want to make here that we haven't really said as explicitly as I think we need to say it. It's important that we think about all the learners in our system in the same way. So we use knowing, doing, and becoming to think about all of our learners. We think about roles, events, routines, and tools as we try to name the system that mattered for all of our learners. We think about how all of our learners, we hope they see themselves as powerful, flexible problem solvers. And we see all of our learners as on a trajectory, okay? When the early math team meets to think about planning things, they are talking about themselves as on a trajectory. That is important. So, let's hear from some folks about what it's felt like to be part of this messy system.
I'm Sharon Sherman. I work at Calhoun County, and I'm an EMS in the Homer School District, which is a great small little school district outside Battle Creek. And what I want to talk to you today is more about my own personal journey in this position, because I was hired right outside of the classroom, and I could totally feel your passion in what you said about educators, because I felt the same way. I had a lot of success in the classroom, and I taught for over 20 years. When I got hired in this position, I was really excited. I went to a training early on, and Jess was actually checking everyone in, and I had lots of questions for her about this new role and what I was going to be responsible for doing, and she said to me, "You're just where you need to be. This is messy work." And I thought, well, I don't know that I completely understand what she means by that, but that's okay. And so I went on and got into the classroom and into the school, and I started to realize that I was in a new role, in a new building, with new educators. They didn't know me, and I didn't know them. And so, how was I going to be responsible for shifting practices with adults that didn't trust me, didn't know me? That was really hard. And so I started to think I needed a plan, right? I needed to come up with a plan. So plan one was I was going to get vulnerable. I was going to put myself out there for the teachers, right? For them. I was going to show them that I could video a lesson and then talk about that lesson and what went well and what didn't go well. And what I realized was my plan was for a perfect lesson. My plan was that the teachers would invite me into their classroom after that, and my plan was that we would have really deep discussions about mathematical practices for students and their experiences and their identity and all of those things, rainbows and unicorns, you know, all of that. And it didn't happen because the lesson wasn't all that great. It was okay. There were some good parts to it. Not so great parts to it. It was messy. But I had a different problem on my hands. And that was that earlier that week, I had a conversation with Jess about filming myself in the classroom. And she said to me, "Oh, really? If you would feel comfortable, we would love for you to deprivatize your practice and share that video with the math team." And I thought, okay, sure. But then when the lesson wasn't what I thought should have been a perfect lesson, how was I going to share that, right? And so I thought maybe she would forget about it, and she didn't. So she reached out to me and said, "Hey, where's that video?" And I had a moment where I had to stop and think about, was that really about teaching someone else how to be vulnerable, or was it really about teaching myself how to be vulnerable and how to be messy? Because the real learning happened in my reflection of that lesson that wasn't so great. The real learning was happening when I was really thinking about, how do you get students to share their strategies when they don't say what you wanted them to say and they don't act the way you wanted them to act in that moment? And so that was the learning that needed to happen. And I think that for our educators, I'm not that far out of the classroom. I know how they feel. You want to close that door and say, I've got it all handled. I can do this. But if we want to shift practices, it doesn't happen in an evaluation. It happens in those messy moments where we're vulnerable and it's scary for us to do. I think about the classroom, when I was in the classroom, and I know Dr. Parks is not going to like this part, so plug your ears, but there would be times sometimes in the classroom where I'd saddle up next to a student and the tears would pop in their eyes when they were trying to do something really hard. And I would say to them, don't be embarrassed by those tears. Those tears mean that you're on the brink of something really incredible. You're learning something new. That's nothing to be sad about. That's awesome. And what I realized this year is that we as educators have to give ourselves that same permission to feel those moments where it's scary, it's vulnerable, the tears might pop out. But this is really, really important work that we're doing, and it's worth doing.
Such a beautiful example of how if we're asking kids to be vulnerable and messy, we have to really do some self-interrogation about what it means for us to actually be messy, right? And what I love about that story is that sometimes we think, well, I love a lot of things, but sometimes we think when we go into a classroom, we have to model a perfect lesson. And actually, teachers are going to learn a lot more if we go in and it's messy and we can puzzle through why it was messy together. That is where the learning is going to happen. I honestly don't think very much is learned from modeled lessons, personal opinion, because that's not the real world. And how am I going to then want to come as a teacher and talk to you about a messy lesson I had if you all somehow have perfect lessons every time? Okay? So the messiness is part of our work, and it's counter-normative. That is a deep cultural norm in our schools that we can't be messy. So I just want to name that as a really big, important thing that we're doing differently, and there's a reason it feels hard, and it's really important to lean into it and keep going.